The story of Kullervo was written when J.R.R. Tolkien was in his early 20s, a practicing Catholic still developing his writing style. Speaking with me on Skype, Tolkien expert Professor Joseph Pearce says that readers should expect a dark story, a story about the fallen state of humanity.
In reading this new story by Tolkien, we will see an image of ourselves, an image of humanity, and something to be pitied, and in some way scorned. Because this story is largely about the dark consequences and the destructive consequences of sin.
The result of Tolkien's love of mythology, the story of Kullervo is based on a 19th century Finnish epic about an orphan who avenges the massacre of his family, leading to murder, incest, and suicide. But what can Catholics gain from such a dark world where even the protagonist is more likely to do wrong than right? Professor Pearce says that humanity is fallen and prone to sin, and needs to be constantly reminded that sin has consequences.
And it certainly doesn't do any of us any favors, and certainly doesn't do our children any favors if we bring them up to pretend that sin doesn't exist and that there isn't darkness and evil out there. Tolkien's story, of course, is what it's doing is presenting the ugliness of sin. And we need to know that sin is ugly. We can't pretend it doesn't exist and sweep it under the carpet, because that's going to come out like a bogeyman and take us by the scruff of the neck later on.
Professor Pearce says that as an early work, the story of Kullervo will not measure up to masterpieces like The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. But he says that the story will be worth reading because fans will see the very beginnings of themes that Tolkien develops more fully in later works.
The necessity to grow in virtue throughout life, to see life as a journey towards God, a journey towards heaven, and the trials and tribulations that come with that, the burden of sin that we have to deal with, which is our cross. All of that comes to fruition on almost perfection in that masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings. In these earlier works, we're going to see merely inklings of that, or as Tolkien said, a germ of that. And it's going to be worth reading for that alone. But of course, we shouldn't think this is going to be as good or as profoundly Christian as The Lord of the Rings, because clearly it isn't going to be.
Professor Pearce advises die-hard fans to dive into the book, which will be released next week in the United Kingdom. But for those who are new to Tolkien, Professor Pearce says that they should start with The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, working their way to the story of Kullervo once they're ready for more. Reporting for Currents, I'm Katie Breidenbach.